Hey guys, my name is Colson Rosa, and welcome back to Seraphim Stories. So before I start off today, I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm so thankful for your guys' support of this channel. And I also wanted to let you guys know that we've redesigned the set a little bit so I could show you guys my books. And I'm really glad with the changes that we've made. So today's topic is going to be the fear of starting and why so many people seem to struggle with the start of their next project or book. And I think there's two primary reasons for this. There's the concept that they're going to have bad ideas and they're just not the creative type and they don't think they could ever write a book because of these limitations. And the other major fear that people have is writer's block and the idea that writing a book is too long of a project. There's going to be way too many snares and hardships and it's going to take way too much endurance and they just don't think they can last. And I want to dismiss both of these concepts and talk about how you can start writing today and how you don't have to let these things hinder you. So first, when it comes to creativity and coming up with great ideas, of course people know that not every idea is created equal. But that being said, you don't have to fear if you're not the creative type or you're having trouble deciding which idea you want to go forward with for your next project. A lot of people ask me how I came up with the names and the setting for the Tales of Amkranos and everything that happens within the book. It's definitely a fantasy setting, so there's a lot of wild imagination that takes place and incredible scenes just meant to take your breath away. And people can get a bit overwhelmed looking at a book like that thinking, do I have to come up with that many unusual out-of-the-box ideas in order to write a book? Well, the thing that's important to know is not every genre or type of novel requires that level of detail and creativity. So I think not only of historical fiction, but other types of stories like dramas or war stories. And these types of novels don't require the amount of new ideas that something like a sci-fi or fantasy novel might entail. That being said, this is a skill that everyone should try to develop as an author because coming up with new ideas is not only going to help you form the base of your story, but it's going to help you problem solve. And it'll help you think of, how do I refine this story? How do I get it to the best place where it needs to be? So I think when you're jogging your creativity, the first thing you need to do is just put pen to paper. Just start the process, and that can be the hardest part for some people. But the more ideas that you have, the more you allow yourself to brainstorm, the more enjoyable your writing is, and the more unique your own style is going to be, because it's going to allow you to consider different takes and aspects on the type of story that you're telling. Having an open mind and thinking outside of the box is not something people naturally gravitate toward. They think it's scary just imagining all the possibilities and then narrowing it down to the best few. But that's exactly what you have to do sometimes. You have to consider the world through a new lens. Consider the types of stories you're telling. What are popular stereotypes or tropes about those stories? Which ones do you want to lean into, and which ones do you want to flip on their head so that you can have a fresh take on that type of story? And I think it's really important too that we can learn from the best in this area. We can learn from famous authors or screenwriters and draw inspiration from them. Draw inspiration not always from the exact story they tell or the exact characters they use, but from the methods they put into place to break outside the mold, set themselves apart, and stand out in that way. And I think drawing from real world events can also help jog our creativity because it allows us to look at aspects of our own lives, our pasts, our desires and our fears and emotions, and pour that into our characters. When I was first writing The Knights of Torin, it seemed like I desired so strongly to have these characters stand out as the good guys and the heroes that I didn't give them the flaws that they needed to have. But then I realized as I was rewriting the book that those imperfections need to be there because they allow someone to be so much more lifelike and realistic in a story. And I think there's a lot of amazing examples of creativity in the world around us. You think not only of J.R.R. Tolkien and the world that he created, which is perhaps one of the most detailed, advanced worlds, which is perhaps one of the most detailed worlds ever put to fiction. Or, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but Miyazaki and some of the films he's been able to create with his team in Japan that have set the standard for imaginative tales that people keep coming back to even now and can never get enough of. But I think balanced alongside creativity is something I would call critical focus. Critical focus is what helps you narrow down on your wide array of ideas and get a sense of where everything needs to be headed. So I've talked in the past about plot lines and how they're an excellent tool to help you do exactly that. But I think also organizing your thoughts is a key way to develop that trait of critical focus, that longing and desire not only to make everything make sense, but to have everything streamlined down to the bare necessities you need for the story, the building blocks, the foundation, and then building upon those. So whenever I have an idea, and this runs right in line with creativity, I always write it down. I keep a journal of all of these thoughts and then apply them when they're the right kind of idea to my plot line. So a lot of you might be asking, well, how do I know what the right idea is to then start applying to my story? Well, I think there's several things to consider when trying to pick the best of your ideas. I think the first of those is character development. Is this choice going to further one of my characters, grow them as a person, make them more unique and interesting, make them more believable perhaps? And I think that's a great place to start. I think another great place to start is with the storyline itself. If I add this idea into the story, is it distracting from my main goal, or is it keeping right in line with it? For example, when I first wrote Knights of Torin, I didn't have a plotline, and I didn't have a clear sense of where the story was going, so I took every idea I had and added it into the story, and it went 10 different directions. So I had to sit down and refocus on what is the main objective of their journey, and why do I have so many unnecessary scenes, unnecessary side stories that aren't contributing anything to the story. And I knew they weren't contributing anything to the story because I could tell my characters weren't going anywhere through them. They weren't introducing anything that would pay off in the grand narrative moving toward Heighton Moor, which was their final destination. And also realizing that I can't include scenes that are going to take away from what I've already built up in the characters in that build-up, the start of the story. You don't want to betray your reader by starting the story one way and completely flipping it so that it's an entirely different story halfway through. You want to take the themes that you've been building and the characters you've been developing, the actions you've been setting up, and pay them off in the end. And I think a lot of this ties back into tension. Having enough stakes and drama in your story that you know each scene is going to matter. At least each scene is going to matter deeply to your characters, where they finally get to see eye to eye with each other, and they finally get to have that reckoning, and they finally get to have that restored relationship that they've always been looking for. Or it's a moment that maybe your character's been looking forward to their entire lives, and how important that moment is to them should shine through to the reader. So in considering all of this, and once you've built a basic framework for your story in the form of a plot line, you can then look back over it and almost as a reader yourself, consider if there are any plot holes, if there are any scenes that don't make sense, or if there are any things you would love to see and you wish would be added. Go ahead and add them. And the great thing about stories is they continue to progress and advance as you're writing them. So for any of you who might be discouraged about starting, you don't have to have it all perfect at the start. As you continue to write, you're going to refine your ideas. You're going to continue to polish them and clean them up. So getting started might be the hardest part, but you don't have to fear if everything isn't lining up just perfectly. Keep going, press on, and as we continue to work on your story and find its perfect narrative, you're going to see that some of those downsides you're seeing right now, you can start to cut away at those. You can start to find the heart of your story and get right to it and not have to worry about some of these fears that you have of whether your ideas are good ones or bad ones. Now, I also want to talk about writer's block because the apprehension some people have towards writer's block is incredible. They fear it like it's a plague. And I know it's an incredibly scary concept of pouring your heart out into this book and coming to realize that you're halfway through and you feel like giving up because there's no way you can progress on with the story. You've run out of ideas, you feel like the well's gone dry, and you don't even know what to say anymore. Well, I want to help you guys with this concept because I think writer's block doesn't have to be as scary as a lot of people make it. I think if we look at imagination like a well, then a lot of people think it's pretty small on the surface, but it actually connects down into a much deeper source of water underground. And I think that's incredibly important to recognize is that when you face writer's block, because everybody's going to face writer's block, you don't have to be afraid of it. You can rethink the problem. And I think that's key, is just recognizing you have writer's block and saying, all right, why did this happen? What should I do about it? And not just letting yourself panic or letting yourself get discouraged. Because when you're rethinking the problem, you'll often find an even better idea of how to improve a scene or improve the stakes of one moment more than you had before. And that's actually going to help you in your writing process. So I think it's excellent that we've actually started with creativity because that's one of your primary tools against writer's block is thinking through the problem and considering it from 10 different angles. Consider it from the villain's perspective, from the hero's perspective, from the side character's perspective, from what you would do if you were in that moment. And if it's something like description, maybe you're someone who's visual like me, and you can picture the scene and you can start to fill in all the gaps of what the buildings look like, what the streets look like, what the entire setting is from a 360 perspective, so that people are getting more than just a glimpse. They're getting sights and smells and sounds that really draw them in and get them curious about this place the characters find themselves in. It's important to know that your first project doesn't have to be a full-length novel. You don't have to start with 200 pages in order to learn the useful life skill of writing. You can start with a short story, make it 10 pages, make it 20 pages, and there's nothing wrong with that. And also because you have an idea from the start, for the start, middle, and end of your story, you're going to be able to skip ahead. If there's a scene that's causing you trouble, there's nothing wrong with pausing for that scene, moving ahead, and then coming back to it later. You might develop new concepts for that particular moment. Like I think even in Sentinels Underground that I'm writing now, there's a battle that I've kind of put to the side, and I'm going to come back to that later because I know I want that battle to portray a very specific message, and I'm figuring out exactly how to do that. So I think you guys can do the same thing. You guys can step into your character's shoes in a sense and consider what you would do if you were faced with their problems and dilemmas. Or maybe even how your character's different from yourself and how you know they would be braver, they would be bolder, they would be more caring, more compassionate, or maybe they would stumble and fall more than you might in that circumstances. So I hope you guys just realize that you can press on through writer's block. You can find sources of inspiration in the world around you, from music to movies, to so many other different incredible sources of not only entertainment but knowledge and truth sometimes. And they don't always have to be bogged down by serious academic books about writing, though those can be incredibly helpful. I think even of my comic books that I have and how those have helped give me fresh ideas about the superhero genre as a whole, how many tropes that it has, how many things it's done both right and wrong. And I'll have to talk to you guys about that sometime. But all that to say, you don't need to have a fear to start writing. Start small with a short story and let your imagination run wild. Take new truths that only you would ever think of. Write them all down. Compare them to each other. Maybe come up with 4 or 5 stories that you would love to tell. Pick your favorite. Not only because you enjoy it, but because it has the right characters that you think people ought to hear about. And those characters you want to help grow to their fullest potential throughout a story, or even to show their weaknesses, their struggles, their downsides. And I think those are stories that need to be heard just as much as any other. So I hope you guys find a lot of encouragement from this, and whatever project you've been looking to start, you should do it. You should go for the fences. You should take that leap of faith and you won't regret it. So thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I hope you have a great day.